Hello again. Today we're going to talk about clauses in combination, that is the way in which clauses combine together. And we'll see that there are two main ways to look at clauses in combination. One is the point of view of dependency, which we also call taxes, and the other one is the point of view of logical semantic relations. And we'll see that this latter concept can be articulated into projection and expansion, two systems whereby the logical semantic relation between clauses is enacted. But let us start from the other way in which we can look at clauses in combination, that is taxes. Alright, so you probably know something about taxes already from the words parataxes and hypotaxes, which are also used in traditional grammar, and I'm pretty sure you may have encountered them in your high school courses. Okay, let's see some examples. What is this? Sure, that's obviously a combination of the two, right? If you look, if I would, but I can't, those are on the same plane, let us say. They can both stay together. Stay alone. Okay, they can work on their own. So that means that they're paratactic. But within that, there's a hypotactic little bit, if I could, which is dependent. Okay, in fact, you'll find that parataxes and hypertaxes are also referred to in some other contexts in grammar as coordination and subordination. You see these words are also used in the slide you see in front of you. But okay, I would prefer you, and at the exam you'll find the words parataxes and hypertaxes, which are more correct from the point of view of functional grammar terminology. Okay, all right, so now let's move on to the other way in which we can look at clauses in combination, and that is expansion. And expansion is divided into extension, which is the first one we'll look at, elaboration, and enhancement. Now you will have noticed that the word extension here is coupled with a plus sign. What does this mean? It means that when you have extension and the clauses combination, you have something that extends, that adds something else to what is stated in the dominant or independent or main clause, we can also call it. Okay, you see, it's not only and, okay? It's not only and. Here you also have like only, nor, you even have while, which you might have always thought as introducing a temporal clause, but you see here it's not a temporal clause. Do you agree? Some mediums speak in a practical down-to-earth, in practical down-to-earth terms, while others may stress the spiritual. It's not a temporal relation. It's something that happens on the same plane. Well, also at the same time if you want, but here the main relation uniting the clauses is one of happening at the same time. One plus the other. That's the sense of extension. And the fourth one also, you see, you might always have thought of if as necessarily introducing a condition. Okay, conditional, but it's not necessarily a real condition all the time. You see here, if the Duke hasn't given that teapot to my aunt, then it is in the cupboard. Okay, it's not a real condition. It's something that happens at the same time. If it's not there, then it's somewhere else, right? Okay, so what you can say to sum about extension is that the secondary clause, the one that extends the main one, expands on what is already there by adding something new to it or offering an alternative, like you see the last example, instead, by means of an addition, a replacement, or a subtraction. Okay, for example, you could look at the if clause up there as an example of replacement. If It's not with my aunt, then it's in the cupboard. There are two alternatives here. It's not a real condition, like if I do that, you'll do that, okay? It's something that introduces an alternative. All right, so let's see the typical conjunctive adjuncts, that's conjunctions that relate clauses in a relationship of extension, okay? And, or, nor, but, in addition, also, moreover, furthermore, alternatively, conversely, on the other hand, whereas, while, except that, if not, then. Okay, here you have to pay attention, as I said, because while can also be temporal. And in that sense, it will introduce enhancement, not extension, as we shall see. But when it introduces an addition, okay, something that happens at the same time in the sense that it's on the same plane, then it's extension, okay, and so on. Right, so this is a table that should be useful to you in order to be able to make sense of the main conjunctive adjuncts and markers of extension, okay. So now we can see elaboration. You see, whereas extension was accompanied by a plus sign, elaboration is accompanied by an equal sign. So I'm sure you can guess for yourself what this means now. The secondary clause expands on the meaning of what is already there by restating it, in other words, further specifying, clarifying, or exemplifying, and commenting. Okay, you see the example shown here. A statement by Galileo is indeed, meaning the same as in fact. You know, you certainly know, you must have been told countless times that in fact doesn't mean the same as infatti, because it introduces something new in English, often in partial contradiction with what's just been said. So in fact, indeed, as a matter of fact, these are typical markers of expansion, elaboration in functional grammar. Okay, so let's see the typical, okay, here we call them connectives, because you know this is the typical word that's used in traditional grammar, so I'm certain that you're familiar with it, but we would prefer you to call these conjunctive adjuncts, because they are conjunctions that, you know, add something. That's why we want you to call them that, okay? These are examples, okay? And one other key way in which you can have elaboration is by means of non-defining relative clauses. Now, if you've read some of the materials that are already online in the PDFs, and also if you've flipped through the book, the textbook by Maria Freddi, you will have noticed that the other main kind of relative clauses, defining relative clauses, are embedded clauses. Okay, because their function is to provide some necessary qualification for the group, the noun group or noun. Okay, so those defining ones, defining relative clauses, are embedded clauses. Now, instead, non-defining relative clauses, those that offer a gloss, an additional comment, those are elaborating expansions. So expansion, elaboration, and they're hypertactic, obviously. Okay, so let's see an example. Inflation, which was necessary for the system, became also lethal. Okay. And another example, of course, is the juxtaposition of a non-finite clause, which is similar to what you have in Italian with a gerund, but it's not quite the same. But it's a useful comparison. I worked for a local firm at that time selling office equipment. Okay? That would work in Italian as well if you use the gerund, and it would be an example of elaboration. Okay? Right, so let's see the third time of expansion then, which is represented by a multiplication sign, enhancement. Okay, let's see some examples. And enhancement is the kind of expansion that introduces some circumstantial features, and all kinds of circumstances can be the object of enhancement when a clause is involved. You see, here there are several examples. Alice didn't want to begin another argument, so she did nothing. Okay, she said nothing. This is a consequence, for example. Alice was standing with her hands ready, for she was in a moment expecting him to fall. This is cause. Okay. Okay. These are examples that you can study if you want, or just have a look at, so that you can have fairly complete overview of the conjunctive adjuncts that are typically associated with enhancement. Okay. This is the continuation. You see there's continued means continued, and you know these are only the most typical, because you know I know that students often ask, can you give us tables to study with examples, with verbs, with lists of words to study? Yes, of course we can, but one important caveat, one important recommendation that I need to make is don't think that these tables tell you the whole story. They just give you some significant examples. They're examples, but they're not exhaustive. Okay, they don't represent the whole world. Okay, but this doesn't mean that it's not useful for you to study them, of course. Now, let's see the other main system of clause combination, which should be distinguished from expansion. Okay, when you look at the way in which the logical or semantic relation between clauses is enacted, you should ask yourself if what you have in front of you is an expansion or a projection. Let's see the difference. Okay, projection is associated with processes of saying and processes of thinking. So you will see towards the end of the course, when we do experiential meanings, that these are processes that are known as verbal and mental. Okay, so those two categories have the property to project. I mean, not all of them. There are actually some mental processes that do not project, but we shall see this in the second year. You don't need to worry about that now. For the time being, I would like you to know that projection is another way, is a functional way to talk about what traditional grammar refers to as direct and indirect speech. Okay, so it's a form of representation of, as I said, speech, speaking, and thinking. So locution and idea. Okay, so let's see some examples. Quoting speech. Okay, she keeps saying to us, inverted commas, I stay up till 12 o'clock every night. So this is an example of what Halliday refers to as quoted speech. Okay? Keep saying is a verbal group complex, and it represents, it is a verbal process. I mean, we don't look at keep, or I mean, we do, but only as long as, I mean, because it's part of the verbal group complex, but the actual process is instantiated not by keep, but by saying. Okay, so that's why it's a verbal process. She is the person that says, Okay, to us, we're the receiver of the saying. And what about the clause, the projected clause? This is a projected locution because it's something that is spoken, not thought. And it is quoted in the sense that what we have in the inverted commas is the literal report, well, the literal quotation of what she said or kept saying. Okay, so when we look at the experiential function, at transitivity especially, we shall see that when verbal processes are involved, the thing, the utterance that is said is called a verbiage. So, for example, I told him that. That would be verbiage, okay? Or I told him so, verbiage. That's the content of what I said. So this projected clause is a kind of verbiage, let's say, but we don't consider it verbiage because it's a separate clause that, you know, can stand alone. Yeah, I stay up till 12 o'clock every night, can stand alone. All right? Okay. So, projecting clause contains a verbal process, whereas the projected one represents what is said more or less exactly. I mean, if it's an inverted commas, we consider it to be more or less exact. Okay, the tactic relationship in this case, that's the relationship of dependency, is one of parataxis because the projected clause in inverted commas, as I said, can stand alone. Okay. So let's see some examples of verbs. As I said, I know that students like to have lists of verbs to study. These are all verbs that project, that can project. But as I said, it's not an exhaustive list. You can have many, many more verbs that do that. Okay, so another example of quoting is thought. And as you can imagine, this is related to the mental process, whereas the previous example I showed you was related to the verbal process. Example, I saw an ad on the paper for a piano and I thought, inverted commas, I'll just inquire. Okay, once again, you know, the quotation is literal, or we assume it to be so. Okay, we have this mental process. And we have a thought that is quoted literally, or we assume it to be literal in inverted commas. Okay, so again, as before, the tactic, the dependency relation is one of parataxis because the clause that you have in inverted commas can stand alone. Okay, let's have a list of verbs again. Wonder, think, believe, reflect, ponder, I don't know, imagine. You can have lots and lots of them. Okay. Now, there's another way in which projection may occur, and it is when the report of the speakers or thinkers' ideas or locution is not literal. In that case, it is reported. So for verbal processes, we have reporting speech. For example, he said that he had originally planned to be a lawyer. Okay? Said is the verbal process, he is the sayer, and that he had originally planned to be a lawyer is the projected locution, which, as I showed you before, could also be considered a kind of verbiage. Okay, it can also be considered a kind of verbiage, but it's much more appropriate to talk about a projected locution, and in particular, it is reported locution. Okay. So once again, we have a verbal process, but what happens here is that the speech is not quoted literally, and it doesn't pretend to be so. It is summarized in a way. So that makes the grammar change, and in particular, what changes is the tactic relationship. So the relationship of dependency is no longer one of parataxis because the projected clause cannot stand alone. These are two clauses of unequal status. So in this case, when reported ideas and locutions are involved rather than quoted ones, the projected clauses are dependent. They're not independent as they are when they are shown in inverted commas. Okay, so here we have a list of verbs, but as I said, these lists, useful though they are by no means exhaustive. Okay, right, so now we have reported thought. Okay, Dr. Godbole always thought that his patient would recover. Now that is shown in brackets because, as you know, you can dispense with it if you want. Okay, so thought is a mental process. Dr. Godbole in this case would not be the sayer. He is the censor. We will see this meta-language, this terminology very well at the end of the course when we do transitivity. Actually, you will have quite a long PowerPoint to study, but I'm sure you'll find it clear. It's only a bit long because it's an important section of functional grammar. But for the time being, just stick to this. Censor is the person, is the participant that has a feeling, in this case, thinks. What about that his patient would recover? Now, if this was, let's say, a participant, just one word, let's say, thought so, that would be a phenomenon, because phenomenon is the participant in mental processes that is involved because some feeling is addressed to it. Okay, so here it's a meta phenomenon because it's not really just one participant, it's a clause. Okay, so this clause is the projected idea, and it plays the same role that we've seen before for reported locution. It's not literal, it doesn't pretend to be literal, but it's a summary of what might have been Dr. Godbole's thought. Okay, so to summarize, the projecting clause contains a mental process. The projected clause is not literal, so the grammar changes, and I'm sure at this point you will imagine what the change is. It's a change that involves taxis. So again, since the thought, the clause that describes the thought cannot stay alone, it's hypotactic. It's dependent upon the main clause. And here is a list of verbs. Okay. Right. All deictic elements are shifted away from reference to the speak situation. What does this mean? Well, I think most of you are Italian speakers, so you will have been educated in Italy. Some of you might have done some Latin in high school. So if I say consecutio temporum or a consecutio temporum with an Italian accent, I'm pretty sure you'll know what this means. It's the property of temporal planes to be to change depending on what the perspective is and what the focus of the tense is. Okay, so when we say that all the deixis is shifted away from reference to the speech situation, it means that the choice of tenses will not depend crucially on tense, but on the real tense, on the time, on the physical time, but it will depend on the dependency relations. Okay, so it's not the speech situation that counts, is the tense that's established by the main clause that counts. It's consecutio temporum. Okay, so let's see an example, because you know that these things are always clearest if we see an example rather than talk about it over and over and over again. So let's see the first example. They said, inverted commas, so this is a what? This is a quoted locution. We won't close next weekend. And if it's a quoted locution, what does this mean? It means that the part in inverted commas is in a paratactic relation with the projecting clause. Okay, so they can both stand alone. What about B? They said they wouldn't close the following weekend. So this is a reported locution that has, well, the same meaning as the one in A, but you see that the tense change. The tenses change, sorry. The tenses change because, as shown above, the tense is not determined in B by the speech situation, but by the tense that's established by the main clause. So, said. Okay, this is the consecutio temporum of English. All right, so let's have some other examples. Stella thought, inverted commas, so quoted idea, I will come back here tomorrow. D, Stella thought she would go back there the next day. So D is a reported idea, having the same content as C, but you see that the tenses have changed again. So here is an explanation. And concerning the here that you have in C, which becomes a there in D, well, yes, you may have noticed that actually in some situations here would also be possible. Okay, so before, I didn't say only tense. Tense is obviously time deixis, but there are other types of deixis. For example, the here that we have here is, what is it? It's a place, deixis of place. So yes, there are some cases in which you could have kept here, okay? If the speaker happens to be in the same place where Stella is, because, the place doesn't change. Yeah, similarly tomorrow, even if I wouldn't be so sure, but yeah, it would be acceptable, perhaps not 100% well written, but it would still be acceptable. Okay, so let's have a little comparison again between quoting and reporting. Okay, quoting is, as I'm certain you agree with, more typical of some registers, especially literature, and when you tell an anecdote, when you tell a story, you will usually favor a quotation over reporting. Okay, the example is taken from a very famous piece of literature. Yeah, Alice in the Wonderland, yeah, which is rife with lots and lots of examples we can use, and which are often used in grammar and in studies in language. Now, okay, this is a table that summarizes a little bit what we've been talking about. So the combination of clauses from the point of view of their logical or semantic relations. First of all, with expansion, and secondly, with projection and different types thereof. Now, the last thing I would like to talk to you today is the notion of embedded projection. Now, I've told you before at the start of this video lecture that when you want to approach projection, you're encouraged to see it as an alternative way of enacting logical semantic relations, and the alternative is expansion. You see here, okay, this is confirmed by the table here, yeah, you see either expansion or projection. Well, but there's also, before we conclude, another way that we can look at projection, and it is the type that's embedded. So when does this happen? It typically happens when there's a noun that configures a certain relation to what comes next. Okay? So what the embedding does after this noun is act as a qualifier. So that's why it's embedded. Okay, but let's see some examples. You know, it's always clearer if we look at examples rather than, you know, describe them. Okay, so these nouns that configure these embedded projection relations are typically statement, report, news, rumor, claim, assertion, argument, intimation, proposition. Okay, these are only examples, okay, but let's see one in action. The argument that English pronunciation has undergone change is common knowledge. Now, why is this embedded? This is embedded because if you take it out, the argument is common knowledge. Does this really tell us something? I'd argue no. You need this qualification in order to know which argument we're talking about. So the English pronunciation has undergone change is part of the nominal group, the argument. Okay, so let's see how this works with ideas. Okay, you can have as nouns introducing embedded projections. You can have thought, belief, knowledge, feeling, idea, expectation, view, opinion, assumption, and many more. Let's see one. The thought of getting up at 6 o'clock, doesn't it set, Stella? So the process is exactly the same as the one above. If you take out the clause that you see here in square brackets of getting up at 6 o'clock, if you take it out, do we know which thought we're talking about? No. So you need that in order to know which thought we're talking about, and that means that the clause in here is part of the nominal group, the thought. So it's an embedded clause. And you see, it works both with finite clauses, has undergone being a finite verb, and with non-finite clauses of getting. Getting is a non-finite verb. So both finite and non-finite clauses can construe a logical semantic relation of embedded projection. Okay, but they're not only statements and commands, nouns that can project an embedded clause. This applies also to offers and commands. With nouns like offer, suggestion, promise, proposal, threat, intention, desire, hope, inclination, decision, you can have, you name them, there are lots. Okay, let's see an example. The hope of getting to Bologna soon was very important to me, for example. Again, if you take away of getting to Bologna soon, you don't know which hope we're talking about. The offer to help her with the exam was very nice. Okay, same as above. The threat that offenders would be punished by law. Okay, and you can go on. But what counts here is that if you take out, you eliminate the clause that's shown here in square brackets, you won't know exactly what the noun means, what it refers to. That's the concept of embedding. Okay, nouns press projected clause. For example, when, if, whether, or a WH clause introduce a locution or something that's spoken or something that's thought. Let's see an example. The question, how long the course could last, was asked. Okay, how long the course would last is embedded into the question. If you take it out, we don't know which question it is. The argument, if or whether English pronunciation has undergone changes, is well accepted. Okay, this is very similar to what we saw in the previous slide. You know, be it that or be it whether or if, the prepositional content, the clause content, is always one of saying, of stating something, and it is still embedded in the noun argument. Finally, Stella faced the problem whether to stay or leave. Okay? Because in order to know which problem Stella faced, we need that whether clause. Okay? So thank you very much for your attention, and please study this section very carefully because it's one of the most important, and then go on to the next lecture.